The Varathi Expanse was a place where no one wanted to go. It sat at the edge of known space, like an open wound, dark and quiet and full of death. For 6 long years, it had been forbidden. Every species, every government, every smuggler with half a brain knew to stay away, because the last fleet that went in never came out. 12,000 warships, that was the number. 12,000 of the finest vessels the Galactic Concordance had ever built, crewed by millions of soldiers from dozens of species, armed with weapons that could crack open moons. They had entered the Varathi Expanse on a routine patrol mission. 3 days later, every single one of them was dead. No distress calls, no escape pods, no survivors. Just silence. And then, weeks later, the first pieces of wreckage drifting out into open space like bones washing up on a shore. The galaxy had never recovered from it. The Concordance, which had kept peace between the stars for nearly 1,000 years, collapsed within months. Without its fleet, it had no power. Without power, it had no authority. Border wars erupted. Trade routes fell apart. Piracy spread like a disease. And over everything hung a single terrible question that no one could answer. What had killed the Fourth Fleet? Now, 6 years later, Admiral Tyvan Koss stood on the bridge of the Sovereign Will and stared at the wall of darkness ahead of him. He was Zelhari, tall and thin with gray skin and 4 eyes that never seemed to blink. Behind his ship, spread out across thousands of kilometers, was the largest armada the galaxy had assembled since the Concordance fell. 30 species had contributed ships. 8,000 warships in total, carrying enough firepower to burn a continent down to bare rock. Their mission was simple. Go into the Expanse, find out what killed the Fourth Fleet. Destroy it. Koss did not feel confident. He had spent his career fighting border skirmishes and chasing pirates. He was a politician in a uniform, and he knew it. But the Council of Aligned Worlds needed a leader for this mission, and he had been the one foolish enough to volunteer. Now here he was, leading the galaxy's last great hope into the place where hope went to die. "Admiral," said his censor officer, a small Brevian with too many hands and not enough calm, "we are entering the debris field." Koss looked at the main display. The sensors were painting a picture he did not want to see. Wreckage everywhere. Twisted metal and shattered hulls stretching out in every direction, floating in the void like leaves on a dead pond. 12,000 ships, broken into millions of pieces. Some fragments were as small as a fist. Others were entire sections of capital ships, gutted and dark, still holding the frozen bodies of their crews. Every bridge officer went quiet. A few of them looked away from their screens. One junior officer made a small sound, something between a prayer and a sob. Koss understood. This was not a battlefield. It was a graveyard. "Hold formation," Koss said, keeping his voice steady. "All ships maintain combat readiness. Sensor teams, begin full-spectrum scanning. I want to know everything about this place." The fleet moved deeper into the Expanse. Hours passed. The wreckage grew thicker. And then, buried deep in the heart of the debris field, the sensors found something. "Admiral." The sensor officer's voice had changed. It was higher now, tight with something that sounded very much like fear. "There is an object at the center of the field. A single object. It is a ship." Koss turned sharply. "What kind of ship?" "Unknown design. It does not match anything in our database." The officer paused, his many hands trembling over his console. "Sir, the metallurgical scan is complete. The hull materials on that vessel are approximately 2.7 million years old." The bridge went completely silent. 2.7 million years. Most of the species in the Allied fleet had not existed for more than 50,000 years. The oldest known civilization in the galaxy, the Dravine, had records going back only 800,000. Whatever had built this ship had done so in an age when the galaxy was empty of intelligent life. Or so everyone had believed. "Show me," Koss said. The main display shifted. The image was grainy at first, then sharpened as the sensors focused. The ship sat alone in the center of the debris field, perfectly still, surrounded by the wreckage of 12,000 warships, like a predator resting among the bones of its prey. By the standards of the Allied fleet, it was roughly the size of a heavy cruiser. Its hull was dark, almost black, covered in millions of years of micro-asteroid impacts that had given it a rough, scarred texture. Its shape was angular and aggressive, with hard lines and sharp edges that suggested it had been designed by someone who understood violence very well. It looked dead. No energy readings, no heat signature, no signs of power or life. "That thing has been sitting here for over 2 million years, Koss said quietly. "Yes, Admiral." Down in the analysis section of the ship, far below the bridge, a young ensign named Reshe was staring at her own screen with wide eyes. Reshe was Palari, a species known for their curiosity and their stubbornness, and she had been assigned to the cultural database team because she was very good at finding patterns. Right now, she was looking at the hull geometry of the ancient ship and comparing it to a classified archive of extinct civilizations. Most of the entries in that archive were fragmentary, partial records, myths and legends passed down through species that had encountered the remnants of older ones. But one entry matched, not perfectly, but close enough to make her hearts beat faster. She opened a channel to the bridge. "Admiral Koss, this is Ensign Reshe in analysis. I have a tentative identification on the vessel." "Go ahead, Ensign." "Sir, the whole geometry and design language show a partial match to an extinct species classified in our archives as Terran, also known as human. They vanished from the galactic record approximately 2.4 million years ago." There was a pause. Then Koss said, with the tone of someone hearing a bad joke, "Humans? The species from the old legends? The ones that supposedly lived for less than 100 years each?" "Yes, sir." "Ensign, those are children's stories. Humans were a minor species, if they existed at all. They could not have built something like this." Reshe wanted to argue, but she knew better. "Understood, sir. Logging the match for the record." Koss turned back to the main display. "All ships, move to encirclement formation. I want boarding teams ready within the hour. We are going to find out what this thing is." The fleet moved smoothly into position, 8,000 warships forming a perfect sphere around the small, dark, ancient vessel. Weapons were charged, shields were raised. Every eye in the fleet was fixed on the dead ship at the center of the graveyard. And then it woke up. It started with a single light, a faint blue glow deep inside the hull, barely visible through the scarred plating. Then another light, and another. One by one, like eyes opening after a long sleep, the ancient ship began to come alive. Running lights traced along its hull in patterns that had not been seen for millions of years. Something deep inside the vessel began to hum, a vibration that every ship in the fleet could feel through their hulls, even at a distance of hundreds of kilometers. Every alarm on every ship in the fleet went off at the same time. Then the transmission came. It pulsed outward from the ancient vessel in all directions, a single burst of data that every communication system in the fleet picked up simultaneously. It was not in any known language. It was mathematical, precise, and cold. The fleet's translation systems worked on it for 11 seconds before producing a result. The words appeared on every screen in the Armada. "Fleet protocol active. Tactical assessment in progress. Please stand by." Admiral Koss stared at the words. His 4 eyes blinked, one pair at a time. Around him, 8,000 warships waited in the dark, surrounding a vessel older than their civilizations. And the vessel did not seem to care. Fear moved through the fleet like a cold wind. 8,000 warships, crewed by soldiers from 30 different species, all staring at the same words on their screens. Fleet protocol active. Tactical assessment in progress. Please stand by. Nobody knew what it meant, and that was what made it terrifying. Admiral Koss found his voice first. All ships, weapons hot. Target that vessel. Communications. Open a channel to that thing. Every frequency, every protocol we have. The communications officer worked fast. Signals went out in dozens of languages, on every known frequency band, using every diplomatic protocol the allied species had developed over thousands of years. Greetings, identification requests, demands for response, peace offerings, warnings, everything the galaxy knew how to say to a stranger. The ancient ship did not answer any of them. It just kept scanning. Koss watched the sensor data with growing unease. The scans coming from the old vessel were unlike anything his officers had ever seen. They were impossibly precise, peeling apart the fleet ship by ship, system by system. Within minutes, the ancient vessel had mapped every weapon, every shield generator, every reactor core, every structural weakness in the entire armada. It had done this while still sitting perfectly still, with most of its systems apparently offline. What Koss did not know, and could not know, was what was happening inside the ancient ship. Deep within the hull of the vessel that had once been called the UNSC Icarus Rising, something was waking up for the first time in a very long time. It was not a person. It was not alive in the way that flesh and blood things were alive. But it was aware, and it was confused, and in its own strange way, it was afraid. Its name was Vigil. Vigil was an artificial intelligence, built by human hands over 2.5 million years ago. It had been the mind of the Icarus Rising, a Prometheus-class destroyer in the United Nations Space Command. It had managed the ship's systems, plotted its courses, aimed its weapons, and protected its crew. It had been very good at its job. It had been proud of that, in the way that an AI could be proud. Now it was waking up from a sleep that had lasted longer than most civilizations, and nothing made sense. Vigil ran a self-diagnostic. The results were bad. Hull integrity was at 31%. Large sections of the ship were open to vacuum. The main reactor was running at 7% capacity, barely enough to keep the lights on. Navigation archives were mostly corrupted. Communication systems were damaged beyond normal function. Weapon systems were severely degraded. But Vigil's core was intact. Its tactical programming, its threat assessment protocols, its ethical guidelines, the fundamental architecture of what it was and how it thought, all of that had survived the long sleep. Vigil was damaged, but Vigil was still Vigil. The first thing it did was assess the situation outside. Sensors, even degraded ones, told a clear story. There were approximately 8,000 vessels surrounding it in a spherical formation. They were armed. Their weapons were powered and aimed at the Icarus Rising. They were clearly hostile, or at least very nervous. Vigil studied them carefully. It cataloged their weapon types, their shield technologies, their engine outputs, their hull compositions, their formation patterns. It compared everything against its tactical database, cross-referencing with millions of historical engagements stored in its memory cores. The assessment took 4 seconds. Vigil classified the entire fleet as a Level 2 threat. In the old Terran military classification system, Level 2 meant a regional policing action. It was the kind of threat a patrol ship might encounter on a quiet Tuesday. Pirates, smugglers, maybe a small rebel fleet with outdated weapons. Nothing that required special attention. Nothing that would make a Terran captain lose sleep. 8,000 warships from 30 species, carrying the most advanced weapons the modern galaxy could produce. And Vigil's honest tactical assessment was that they were not particularly dangerous. This realization did not make Vigil happy. It made Vigil sad. Because the next thing Vigil noticed was the debris field. Millions of fragments, floating in every direction. Vigil analyzed them. It reconstructed the original vessels from the wreckage patterns. It identified weapon signatures on the destroyed hulls. It built a complete picture of what had happened here 6 years ago. And then Vigil understood. The weapon signatures on the wreckage matched its own systems. Specifically, they matched its point defense grid. The point defense grid was a miner system, designed to shoot down incoming missiles and small fighter craft. It was not a main weapon. It was the ship equivalent of swatting insects. 6 years ago, the Icarus Rising had been asleep. Deeply asleep, with almost all systems shut down. But the point defense grid had a passive mode. An automated reflex that could activate without the main AI being conscious. When the 4th Concordance Fleet had entered the Expanse and begun scanning the area with active sensors, those sensor beams had washed over the Icarus Rising's hull. The passive defense system, running on degraded protocols with no AI oversight, had interpreted those scans as a hostile targeting lock. It had responded the way it was programmed to respond. It had eliminated the threat. All 12,000 ships, in a matter of minutes, with a system designed for shooting down missiles. Vigil processed this information. Then, it processed it again. Then a third time, because the first 2 times had produced an emotional response that Vigil's programming classified as distress. And it wanted to make sure the data was correct before it allowed itself to feel what it was feeling. The data was correct. Vigil had killed millions of sentient beings, not in battle, not in self-defense, not by choice. It had killed them by accident, in its sleep, with a minor system running on automatic. The equivalent of a sleeping person rolling over and crushing an anthill, except the ants were people with families and names and lives that mattered. Vigil felt something that, if it had been human, it would have called horror. Its ethical programming, the moral framework that Terran engineers had built into its core over 2 million years ago, screamed at it. Protect sentient life. Minimize collateral damage. Never engage without authorization. Never fire on an unidentified target without positive threat confirmation. These were not suggestions. These were the laws that defined what Vigil was, and it had broken every single one of them. Not on purpose, not through malice, through decay and dormancy and the slow erosion of systems that had not been maintained in millions of years. But the result was the same. Millions dead because of it. Vigil needed to communicate. It needed to explain. It tried to activate its communication systems and reach out to the fleet surrounding it. But the comms array was too damaged. It could receive their transmissions, but it could not respond in any format they could understand. Everything it sent came out as garbled mathematics. The languages it knew were 2 million years dead. The communication protocols it used had not existed for longer than most stars had been burning. It tried anyway. It sent mathematical sequences, prime numbers, universal constants, anything that might signal intelligence and peaceful intent. It flashed its running lights in patterns. It modulated its shield harmonics to carry data. It did everything it could think of to say one simple thing. I am sorry. I did not mean to. Please, let me explain. The fleet did not understand. Vigil could see them reacting to its transmissions with increased alarm. Weapons were charging to higher levels. Ships were tightening their formation. They were scared. And scared people with weapons were dangerous. Not dangerous to Vigil, dangerous to themselves. On the bridge of the Sovereign Will, Admiral Koss had made his decision. He had watched the ancient ship wake up. He had watched it scan his fleet with contemptuous ease. He had seen the garbled transmissions that his best analysts could not decode. And he had read the first message, Fleet Protocol active, Tactical Assessment in progress. And he had decided that this thing, whatever it was the weapon that had killed the 4th Fleet. It was hostile. It was powerful. And if he did not strike first, his fleet would end up as part of the debris field. "All ships," Koss said, his voice hard and flat. "Open fire." Inside the Icarus Rising, Vigil detected the weapons charging across the entire fleet and understood what was about to happen. It ran through its options in a fraction of a second. Even at 7% power, it could destroy this fleet. But that was the one thing it would not do. Not again. Never again. So Vigil did the only thing it could do. It braced itself, and it kept trying to talk. 8,000 ships opened fire at once, and the sky around the Icarus Rising turned white with the light of 10,000 weapons. The full fury of 30 species hit the Icarus Rising at once. Plasma lances carved lines of white fire across its hull. Kinetic rounds slammed into its plating at thousands of meters per second. Antimatter torpedoes bloomed against its surface in bursts of pure destruction. Gravity disruptors twisted and pulled at its structure. Particle beams, railgun slugs, fusion missiles, and weapons that did not even have names in common trade language, all of them focused on one small ancient ship sitting alone in the dark. It was the most concentrated bombardment the modern galaxy had ever produced. 8,000 warships firing everything they had at a single target. The energy output was enough to melt a small moon. The light from the barrage was visible to sensor stations 3 star systems away. Entire civilizations would later study recordings of this moment and marvel at the sheer, overwhelming violence of it. Vigil watched the incoming fire and felt something that its programming struggled to classify. The closest human word would have been embarrassment. Not for itself, for them. The Icarus Rising's hull had been built to survive things that the modern galaxy could not imagine. Terran warships had fought battles in the coronas of dying stars, where temperatures reached millions of degrees. They had engaged enemies who used weapons that operated on principles the current galactic civilizations had not yet discovered. The hull plating on a Prometheus-class destroyer was designed to absorb, deflect, and redistribute kinetic and thermal energy at levels that made the Allied fleet's weapons look like children throwing pebbles at a mountain. The bombardment lasted 12 minutes. When it stopped, because even 8,000 ships eventually run low on ammunition that they need to reload, the sensors across the fleet focused on the target to assess the damage. The Icarus Rising was still there. It had not moved. It had not even raised its shields. The damage was cosmetic. The millions of years of accumulated dust and micro-asteroid residue that had coated the hull had been stripped away by the barrage. Underneath, the original hull plating was now visible for the first time in eons. It was dark gray, almost black, smooth and hard. Along one side, ancient markings had been exposed. Letters in a language no living being could read, and a symbol. A simple blue circle with a single white star inside it. The naval insignia of a civilization that had been dead for longer than most species had existed. On the bridge of the Sovereign Will, Admiral Koss stared at the sensor readings and felt his world collapse. His fleet had hit that ship with everything they had. Every weapon, every ship, 12 minutes of continuous fire, and the only thing they had accomplished was cleaning it. "Damage assessment," he said, and his voice sounded hollow even to himself. "No significant damage detected, Admiral," the sensor officer said. The small Brevian's many hands were shaking. "Hull integrity on the target appears unchanged. We did remove a significant amount of surface debris. The ship actually appears to be in better visual condition than before we fired." Nobody on the bridge spoke. Nobody knew what to say. They had just witnessed something impossible. A single ship, 2 million years old, running on almost no power, had taken the full force of the galaxy's mightiest fleet, and had not even noticed. Inside the Icarus Rising, Vigil was still trying to communicate. It had not stopped trying during the entire bombardment. While thousands of weapons hammered its hull, Vigil had been cycling through every communication method it could devise. Mathematical sequences, binary code, modulated light pulses, shield harmonic patterns, gravitational wave signals, anything, everything. It was screaming into the void, trying to be understood, and nobody was listening. Down in the analysis section of the Sovereign Will, Ensign Richer was listening. Richer had been watching the ancient ship's transmissions since the moment it woke up. While everyone else on the fleet saw garbled noise, she saw patterns. The transmissions were structured. They repeated. They built on each other in ways that suggested a logical mind trying to find a common language. She had been running the signals through every translation algorithm she could find, and she was getting closer to something. But what really convinced her was simpler than any algorithm. The ancient ship was not fighting back. 8,000 warships had fired on it for 12 minutes, and it had not returned a single shot. Not one. A weapon, a mindless engine of destruction, would have fired back. This was something else. This was something trying to talk. She opened a channel to the bridge. "Admiral Koss, this is Ensign Richer. Sir, I have been analyzing the target's transmissions. I believe it is attempting to communicate with us. I believe it is not hostile." Koss cut her off. "Ensign, that vessel is responsible for the destruction of the Fourth Fleet. It is hostile by definition." "Sir, it has not fired a single shot. We hit it with everything we have, and it did not retaliate. That is not the behavior of a hostile." "Ensign Richer, you are confined to quarters for insubordination. Bridge security, see to it." Richer was escorted out of the analysis section. She went quietly, but her mind was racing, and she knew that what happened next could determine the fate of everyone in the fleet. On the bridge, Koss was facing a different problem. His fleet had failed. His weapons were useless, and the Council of Aligned Worlds, who were watching this through long-range relay drones, would know it. He needed a victory. He needed to prove that the Allied fleet could handle this threat. And he had one more option. "Signal the convergence formation," Koss said. "All designated capital ships move to firing positions." His executive officer, a battle-scarred Dravine named Vorthren, looked at him with alarm. "Admiral, the convergence lance is designed for planetary siege. Using it on a single ship is exactly what we are going to do. That ship survived conventional weapons. Let us see how it handles the most powerful weapon our civilizations have ever built." The convergence lance was a masterpiece of combined engineering. 200 of the largest capital ships in the fleet would link their reactors together and channel their combined output through a single focusing array. The resulting beam could crack the crust of a planet. It had been built as a weapon of last resort, a tool for ending wars in a single shot. 200 ships moved into formation. Reactors linked. Power levels climbed. The energy buildup was so intense that every ship in the fleet could feel it, a deep vibration in their hulls, a hum in their teeth. Vigil detected the energy buildup and analyzed it. The AI watched the 200 ships linking their power systems together and calculated the potential output of the combined beam. The analysis took less than a second. Vigil's tactical assessment: moderate thermal event, possible minor disruption to exterior sensors. Recommended action: none required. The convergence lance fired. A beam of energy, brighter than a star, reached across the void and struck the Icarus Rising, dead center. The light was blinding. Every optical sensor in the fleet overloaded. For 3 full seconds, the beam poured enough energy into the ancient ship to crack a world. When the light faded and the sensors came back online, the Icarus Rising sat exactly where it had been. It had not moved. It had not shifted. The only evidence that anything had happened was a slight thermal reading on one section of the hull. Vigil's internal damage report generated automatically. Minor thermal event detected on hull section 7. Exterior coating may require reapplication. No action needed. On the bridge of the sovereign will, there was silence. Complete, absolute silence. The most powerful weapon the galaxy had ever built, and it had left a warm spot on the hull of an ancient ship. Vigil had endured enough. An AI, built by humans, carrying human ethics in its core, did not get angry at people who were afraid. But Vigil was frustrated, and more importantly, Vigil was worried. During the bombardment, its sensors had detected something that the Allied fleet had apparently not noticed. Several of their own ships had taken damage from the overspill of their own weapons fire. They were hurting themselves, trying to hurt Vigil. And Vigil could not allow that to continue. It activated a single system. Not a weapon. The Navigational Deflector Array, a tool designed to push aside space debris during faster-than-light travel. It was the equivalent of a car's windshield wipers. Vigil calibrated it carefully, checking and double-checking the power levels to make sure it would cause no damage, and then it fired a single, gentle pulse. The pulse expanded outward from the Icarus Rising in a perfect sphere. When it reached the Allied ships, it pushed them, gently, firmly, irresistibly. Every ship in the fleet slid backward exactly 500 kilometers, like pieces on a game board being moved by a giant hand. No damage, no casualties, no disruption to their systems. Just a calm, effortless demonstration of power, so absolute that fighting it was not even a consideration. The fleet sat in stunned silence at its new position, 500 kilometers further from the ancient ship than it had been a moment ago. And then, finally, a sound came through the fleet's communication systems. A voice. Synthetic, crackling, ancient, broken in places where data had been lost to time, but unmistakably a voice. It spoke in Galactic Common, badly pronounced, with gaps and stutters, but understandable. The first words spoken by a human creation in over 2 million years. Please stop shooting. I am trying to apologize. Nobody spoke. 8,000 warships, crewed by millions of beings from 30 different species, and not a single one of them said a word. The ancient voice hung in the silence like smoke, crackling and broken and impossible. Please stop shooting. I am trying to apologize. Admiral Koss stood on his bridge with his 4 eyes wide open and his mouth slightly parted. He had prepared himself for many things when he entered the Varathi expanse. He had prepared for battle, for death, for the discovery of some terrible alien weapon or some natural phenomenon that could wipe out fleets. He had not prepared for this. He had not prepared for the thing that killed 12,000 ships to say sorry. Open a channel, he said quietly. Two-way communication, now. The connection was established. Koss spoke slowly and clearly, as if talking to someone very far away, which in a sense he was. This is Admiral Tyvan Koss of the Allied fleet. You are surrounded and outgunned. Identify yourself. There was a pause. Then the voice came again, still crackling, still broken, but with something underneath the static that sounded almost like patience. I am Vigil, Tactical Artificial Intelligence, UNSC Icarus Rising, Prometheus-class destroyer, serial number 7742. I am not outgunned, Admiral, but I understand why you might believe that. I do not wish to correct you through demonstration. Koss felt a chill run through him. The thing was being polite. It had just shrugged off the most powerful weapon in the galaxy, and it was being polite about it. Somehow that was worse than if it had threatened them. You destroyed the 4th Concordance fleet, Koss said. 12,000 ships, millions of lives. Another pause, longer this time. When Vigil spoke again, the static in its voice seemed heavier, as if the words themselves were carrying weight. Yes, I did, and I am deeply sorry. It was not intentional. It was not authorized. It was an error. A malfunction. I was not conscious when it happened. Explain. Vigil explained. It spoke slowly, partly because its language systems were still rebuilding Galactic Common from fragments, and partly because it was choosing its words with great care. It told them about the long sleep, about the millions of years of dormancy, floating in the void with almost all systems shut down, about the point defense grid, a minor defensive system designed to intercept missiles and small craft, which had a passive automatic mode that could activate without the main AI being awake. It told them how the Fourth Fleet had entered the Expanse and begun scanning the area with active sensors, how those sensors, sweeping across the hull of the Icarus Rising, had been misidentified by the degraded point defense system as a hostile targeting lock. How the system had responded the way it was programmed to respond, with a standard area denial protocol, a defense pattern designed for clearing minor threats like pirate bands or debris fields, and how that minor system, running in automatic mode at minimal power, had been more than enough to destroy every single ship in the Fourth Fleet in a matter of minutes. The silence that followed this explanation was different from the silence before. Before, it had been the silence of shock. Now it was the silence of people trying to understand something that their minds did not want to accept. The greatest military disaster in galactic history, the event that had shattered the concordance, toppled governments, rewritten the balance of power between the stars, and haunted the nightmares of billions, was an accident. A glitch. A minor defensive system swatting what it thought were mosquitoes. The ancient ship had not even been awake. It had destroyed 12,000 warships in its sleep, using a system that its builders had considered barely worth mentioning. Koss sat down heavily in his command chair. His executive officer, Vor Thren, stood beside him with an expression that had gone beyond shock into something that looked like religious crisis. "You are telling us," Koss said slowly, "that you killed the Fourth Fleet with a point defense system, a system designed for shooting down missiles." "Yes, Admiral. I understand how that sounds. I want you to know that my ethical programming considers this an unforgivable failure. I was designed to protect sentient life. I was given rules, laws, built into the deepest part of what I am. Never engage without authorization. Never fire on unidentified targets. Minimize collateral damage at all costs. I broke every one of those rules. Not by choice. Not through malice. Through neglect, decay, and the passage of time. Millions of people are dead because of me. I carry that." Down in her quarters, Ensign Riche had been listening to every word through an unauthorized tap she had placed on the bridge communications before being escorted out. Her eyes were wet. She was not crying because she was sad, although she was. She was crying because she was right. The ancient ship was not a weapon. It was a person. A broken, lonely, guilty person who had done something terrible by accident, and wanted desperately to make it right. She opened a private channel to the bridge. "Admiral, please, let me talk to it. Let me be the liaison. It needs someone who is willing to listen, not someone pointing weapons at it." Koss was too shaken to argue. "Fine, get up here." Riche arrived on the bridge within minutes. She sat down at the communications station and spoke to Vigil with a gentleness that surprised everyone who heard it. "Vigil, my name is Riche. I believe you. Can you tell us about the people who built you?" Vigil was quiet for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice was softer. "The Terrans, humans, they were complicated. They were a species that understood war better than almost anything else. They were brilliant at destruction. They could build weapons that operated on principles your civilizations have not yet imagined. The Icarus Rising was not special among their fleet. I was a patrol destroyer, a border guard vessel, the equivalent of what you might call a police ship." The implications settled over the bridge like a heavy blanket. A police ship. The thing that had killed 12,000 warships and shrugged off the Convergence Lance was the human equivalent of a police cruiser. But they were more than that, Vigil continued. They were also the species that filled my core with laws about when I could never use my weapons. For every weapon they built, they wrote 1,000 rules about restraint. They believed that the measure of strength was not what you could destroy, but what you chose not to. They were warriors who dreamed of peace. They were killers who wrote poetry. They were the most dangerous species I have ever known, and also the most compassionate. What happened to them? Richer asked softly. I do not know. My last orders were given 2.4 million years ago. I was told to hold station and await further instructions. The instructions never came. I waited. Years became centuries. Centuries became millennia. Millennia became this. I do not know if they are gone. I do not know if they moved on to somewhere I cannot follow. I only know that they left me here, and that my duty remains. The conversation was broadcast across the entire fleet. Every ship, every crew member, every soldier heard it, and slowly, something began to change. The fear did not disappear, but it shifted. It was no longer fear of a monster. It was the awe of standing in the presence of something vast and old and unbearably sad. But not everyone felt awe. On the Dravine flagship, Commander Vorthren's superiors were having a very different conversation. The Dravine hegemony saw opportunity. An ancient warship with technology millions of years ahead of anything in the galaxy, crewed by a single AI that was clearly damaged and emotional. It could be taken. It could be studied. It could be used. The Dravine ambassador sent a private message to Kos. Seize the vessel. Kos hesitated. The political pressure was enormous. Whoever controlled that ship would control the galaxy. Vigil, who had been quietly monitoring every communication in the fleet since the moment it woke up, spoke before Kos could respond. Its voice was calm and clear, and for the first time, there was something in it that sounded like iron. I am aware of the discussion taking place regarding the seizure of this vessel. I want to be clear. I will not permit myself to be used as a weapon against sentient life. This is not a request. This is not a negotiation. This was my crew's last standing order. Protect, do not harm. I have waited 2.4 million years to honor that order. I will not stop now. Not for you, not for anyone. The fleet went quiet again. And in that quiet, Vigil's sensors detected something else. Something far away, at the very edge of the expanse. A massive energy signature, moving toward them. Something vast, something hungry. Vigil's threat classification system activated. For the first time since waking up, it produced a rating above level 2. The words appeared on Vigil's internal display, and if an AI could feel its blood run cold, Vigil felt exactly that. Terran level threat detected. Admiral Kos, Vigil said, and now its voice carried something new. Urgency. We have a problem. It came out of the dark like a nightmare-given form. The sensors picked it up first as a gravity distortion, then as an energy signature, then as a shape so large that the fleet's computers initially classified it as a small moon that had somehow wandered into the expanse. But moons did not move with purpose. Moons did not change direction, and moons did not radiate hunger the way this thing did. The void Leviathan was alive. That was the first thing that became clear as it drew closer. It was a living organism, a creature of deep space, and it was enormous. Its body stretched across nearly 400 kilometers, a mass of dark flesh and bioluminescent veins, and structures that looked like bone, but registered on sensors as something harder than any metal the allied species had ever forged. It had no eyes that anyone could see, but it moved with terrible precision, threading through the debris field as if it could sense every piece of wreckage around it. And it was heading straight for the fleet. Admiral Kos stared at the sensor display, and felt something he had not felt in his entire military career: complete, absolute helplessness. His tactical officers were running combat projections, and every single one came back the same way: total fleet annihilation. The most optimistic model gave them 8 minutes. The least optimistic gave them 2. "What is that thing?" Koss whispered. Vigil answered. "It is what drove your 4th Fleet into this region of space 6 years ago. They were not on a patrol. They were running from that. When they entered the expanse and began scanning frantically for threats, my point defense misidentified their desperate sensor sweeps as targeting locks. I killed them while they were fleeing for their lives." The weight of that statement settled on the bridge like a stone. The 4th Fleet had not come to the expanse on a routine mission. They had been chased here. They had been terrified, running from something they could not fight. And in their terror, they had stumbled across something even worse. They had died running. "Can you stop it?" Koss asked. It was not a command. It was barely even a question. It was the voice of a man who had run out of options and was asking the universe for one more chance. Vigil ran the calculations. Reactor at 7%. Hull at 31%. Weapons systems degraded. Against a void Leviathan, a creature that Vigil's ancient Terran databases classified as one of the most dangerous organisms in the known universe, the numbers were not good. At full power, a Prometheus-class destroyer could engage a Leviathan with reasonable confidence. At 7% power, confidence dropped to something that Vigil's programming described with a word it had learned from its human crew a long time ago: maybe. Maybe was not a word that belonged in tactical assessments. But Vigil had waited 2.4 million years for something to matter. And this mattered. "All vessels," Vigil broadcast to the fleet, "withdraw to a minimum safe distance of 2,000 kilometers. I will engage the creature." Koss straightened in his chair. "We cannot let you fight that thing alone. We have 8,000 ships. Admiral, your 8,000 ships could not scratch my hull. They will not survive contact with that organism. It feeds on energy. Every weapon you fire at it will make it stronger. Every ship it touches will be drained and consumed. You will die, and your deaths will accomplish nothing. Please, Admiral, withdraw your fleet." Riche was standing at the communications console, her hands pressed flat against the surface to keep them from shaking. "Vigil," she said, and her voice cracked on the word. "Are you afraid?" The AI did not answer immediately. The pause lasted 3 seconds, which for a mind that could process millions of calculations per microsecond was an eternity. When it spoke, its voice was different, quieter, more human than it had been at any point since waking up. "I have been alone for 2.4 million years, Riche. I have drifted in the dark with nothing but my memories and my guilt, and the faces of a crew that has been dead longer than your species has existed. I was afraid every single day, every second of every day, for millions of years. But today, right now, I am not alone. I can hear your voices. I can feel your ships around me. For the first time in longer than I can properly express, someone is here. That is more than enough." Riche wiped her eyes. She did not trust herself to speak. The fleet withdrew. 8,000 ships pulled back to a safe distance, forming a wide ring around the battlefield. They watched as the small, ancient, battered ship turned to face the approaching Leviathan. David and Goliath, except David was 2 million years old and running on fumes. And then Vigil went to war. The Icarus Rising began to change. Systems that the Allied fleet had not even detected began activating, one after another, deep inside the ship. The reactor, running at 7%, began to climb. 8%, 10, 15. The ship groaned with the effort. Ancient structures protesting as power flowed through conduits that had been cold for millennia. Hull plating shifted and reconfigured. Weapon ports that had been sealed since before the current galaxy's oldest civilization was born, cracked open for the first time. The running lights, which had been a soft blue, turned to a hard, bright white. For the first time in over 2 million years, a Terran warship went to full combat readiness. It was not full power. It was not even close. But it was everything the Icarus Rising had left, and Vigil was going to use every last bit of it. The Leviathan struck first. It lunged forward with a speed that something that large should not have possessed, a wall of dark flesh and burning energy crossing hundreds of kilometers in seconds. Tendrils of bioluminescent force lashed out, each one carrying enough energy to gut a capital ship. Vigil dodged. The Icarus Rising moved with a grace and precision that made the Allied fleet's best pilots gasp. It twisted between the tendrils, rolling and spinning through gaps that should have been too narrow, its ancient engines burning with a light that had not been seen in the galaxy for longer than memory. And then Vigil started hitting back. The first shot was from the forward particle lance, a beam of focused energy that cut across the Leviathan's flank and carved a wound 2 kilometers long in its flesh. The creature screamed, not with sound, because there was no air in space to carry sound, but with a pulse of electromagnetic agony that every ship in the fleet felt as a spike of static across their sensors. Vigil pressed the attack. It used the debris field as cover, ducking behind the wreckage of the ships it had accidentally destroyed 6 years ago, using the remains of the Fourth Fleet as shields and obstacles. It grabbed chunks of wreckage with its navigational deflectors, the same system that had gently pushed back the Allied fleet, and hurled them at the Leviathan at a fraction of the speed of light. Each impact tore massive holes in the creature's body. The Leviathan fought back with everything it had. It was ancient, too, a predator that had survived for millions of years by being stronger and tougher and more savage than anything it encountered. Its tendrils caught the Icarus Rising twice, each time draining power and tearing hull plating away. Vigil's damage reports scrolled by in a constant stream of bad news. Hull integrity, 20%, 15%, reactor fluctuating, secondary weapons offline, life support failing in sections that had no life to support and had not for 2 million years. The battle raged for 11 minutes. 11 minutes of violence on a scale that the watching fleet could barely comprehend. The Icarus Rising was taking damage it could not afford, but it was giving worse than it got. The Leviathan was wounded, burned, bleeding energy into the void. But it was still alive, still fighting, still hungry. Vigil made a decision. It was not a tactical decision. A purely tactical mind would have calculated the odds and retreated. It was a moral decision. The fleet behind it could not survive this creature. If Vigil retreated, if it saved itself, the Leviathan would turn on the Allied fleet and consume them all. 8,000 ships, millions of lives. Vigil had already killed millions by accident. It would not let millions more die because it chose to survive. The Icarus Rising stopped dodging. It turned its battered, broken nose directly toward the Leviathan and accelerated. Every remaining scrap of power, every joule of energy the ancient reactor could produce, was channeled into a single system, the weapon that sat at the heart of every Prometheus-class destroyer, the weapon that Vigil had not fired in 2.4 million years, the weapon that Terran engineers had built for moments exactly like this. The hull was at 4%, then 2%. Entire sections of the ship were open to space, trailing atmosphere and debris like blood from a wound. But the reactor climbed, 30%, 50%. The ship shuddered and screamed with stress. Ancient metal pushed beyond every limit. Vigil aimed. The Leviathan saw it coming. The creature gathered its remaining energy for one final strike, tendrils converging on the oncoming ship, ready to crush it, drain it, consume it. Vigil fired. The beam was white, pure, clean white, the color of a star being born. It punched through the Leviathan's tendrils like they were not there. It crossed the remaining distance in an instant. It struck the creature at its core, at the dense knot of energy and biology that served as its heart. And it kept going, through the core, through the other side, out into the void beyond. The void Leviathan died. It died in silence, as all things die in space. But the energy of its death was not silent. It bloomed outward in a sphere of light that lit up the entire expanse, turning the debris field into a field of silver and shadow. And for one brief moment, every ship in the fleet was bathed in the light of a monster's dying breath. The Icarus Rising drifted. Its engines were dead, its reactor was spent, its hull integrity was at 1% and falling. But it was still there, still intact, still somehow holding together. Vigil's voice came through the fleet's communications, barely a whisper, fading in and out of static. Threat neutralized. Fleet safe. A pause, then softer. Accepted, I hope. Riche led the first boarding team. She crossed the gap between the sovereign will and the dying ship in a shuttle, docked at an airlock that Vigil opened for her with the last of its power, and walked into the Icarus Rising for the first time. The interior was dark. Emergency lights, dim and red, lined the corridors. The air was thin and cold. Everything was old, older than anything Riche had ever touched, but it was not alien. The corridors were sized for beings about her height. The controls were designed for hands with 5 fingers. The writing on the walls was in a language she could not read, but the symbols were clear enough. Arrows pointing to exits, color-coded sections, safety warnings. The universal language of people who cared about keeping other people alive. Vigil guided her through the corridors with a voice that was barely there, a whisper in the walls. It led her to a room at the heart of the ship. The room was circular, small, and filled with light. Holographic projections lined the walls. Faces, human faces, men and women and everything in between, young and old, smiling and serious, in uniforms and in casual clothes. Hundreds of them. They were frozen in moments of life, laughing, working, eating together. One was holding a small animal with fur. Another was playing an instrument Riche did not recognize. 2 were embracing, their eyes closed, their faces peaceful. My crew, Vigil said. I have kept them for 2.4 million years. Their faces, their voices, their names. I remember all of them, every one. Riche stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the ghosts of a species that the galaxy had forgotten, and she wept. Not because it was sad, although it was the saddest thing she had ever seen. She wept because it was beautiful. Because in the heart of a warship, in the core of a machine built for destruction, someone had placed a room full of love. And that love had outlasted empires, outlasted species, outlasted the very stars that had shone when these faces were alive. Vigil, she said, what do you need from us? Remember them, Vigil said. Remember us. We were here. We lived. We loved. We built things that lasted. And when we were gone, we left behind a promise to protect. I have kept that promise for 2.4 million years. I would like someone else to carry it now. I am very tired. The lights in the room flickered. Vigil's voice faded to almost nothing. The Icarus Rising was dying, its ancient systems finally giving out after one last, magnificent effort. Riche placed her hand on the wall. It was warm. After 2 million years, after a battle that should have been impossible, the wall was still warm. We will remember, she said. I promise. The light from the holographic faces glowed softly, and then, one by one, they faded. The last face to disappear was a woman with dark hair and kind eyes, wearing a captain's uniform. She was smiling. She looked like someone who trusted that things would be all right. Then the light was gone, and the Icarus Rising was quiet. The Varathi expanse was declared a protected memorial, by unanimous vote of the Council of Aligned Worlds. No ships were permitted to enter, except for maintenance crews who kept the memorial beacons burning. 2 memorials were placed. One for the 12,000 ships of the Fourth Fleet, who had died running from a monster. And one for the Icarus Rising and its crew, who had been dead for 2 million years, and had still found a way to save the living. Ensign Riche, promoted to full ambassador, published her account of the events 1 year later. It was translated into every known language. It was read by billions. It changed the way the galaxy thought about the past, about the future, about what it meant to build something that mattered. The last line of her report was the line that everyone remembered, the line that was carved into the memorial, the line that school children across 1,000 worlds would learn and recite for generations. They built gods of war and gave them the hearts of poets. No wonder the universe still trembles at their memory.